Welcome to the Occupational Safety Leadership Podcast, episode number 267 with repeat guest Matt Herron of the Southwest Research Institute. Matt was also on episode 91, where we talked a little bit about ergonomics. We started to delve into lasers. We talked about the open beam versus the cabinet, but I really wanted to have Matt back to sit down and to help me to talk about ergonomics. Well, first off, Matt, thank you so much for coming back, for sparing the time to do a second round. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Mhm.
Thank you for having me
Uh,
back.
So I wanted to sit down. I know that you do a lot with things that are like ergonomics, and as part of the research, I'm sure that you have to sit down and say, how do you make something as good as you can for a human? And a little
Mhm.
bit of the backstory is both of my kids are now in college, so I've had a chance to get more handy around the house to fix fix my own car again. And boy, have they gotten hard in the last 20 years. It used to really be simple and easy to fix a car.
Yeah,
And
they've crammed a lot of stuff in there, haven't they?
yeah, and just like the more that I'm bending over and taking off hoses to really get to the problem and those kinds of things, there's a lot of really awkward postures. Now, of course, I'm obviously also older now, so I'm sure that
Hmm.
that hasn't helped now, in these 20 or 25 years of not working on cars. But it seems like with these awkward postures, if we sat down and just thought about our typical cube farm, all those seem pretty easy, to engineer out. But if it are there any tips and tricks that you can think of on how do you really help out that maintenance person who somebody calls and says, "Hey, hurry up and fix this," and they have to kind of spring into action, show up, kind of assess it, and say, "Well, here's the first step. Here's how I really get going."
Yeah. So
Mhm.
I think with the case that you were just presenting there in terms of working on vehicles, is that somebody else has designed it, right?
Right.
And the other piece that you mentioned was your body is telling you that, yeah, that's an awkward posture. That kind of hurts, right?
Mhm.
And as we know from an ergonomic standpoint, these are cumulative trauma disorders, so they occur over time. So those musculoskeletal disorder risk factors, such as the awkward postures, the repetitive motion, and the excessive force, those really do play a factor in how it affects our body, right? So
Mhm.
you know, we need to be able to train our folks, our maintenance folks, our technicians, whoever's working on those systems to be able to identify that and be able to raise their hand and say, hey, there's a problem here because those are our frontline workers. They know where those problem spots are. They know where it hurts their body. So if you can get them to participate in your ergonomics program, that is a key factor. I think another thing to look at is from what are your metrics telling you? Like, what are your injuries and illnesses talking? How are those talking back at you essentially? Right. So that way you can kind of do a risk rank down of, hey, we've got a lot of back injuries going on, or a lot of hand or wrist injuries going. So maybe that's a special program that we need to put a task force on and attack voraciously so that we can get those recordable injuries down.
Yeah. The one thing that has helped is I don't think that my skill has gotten any better in 20 years,
Hmm.
but I think that I've gotten a whole lot smarter. So I could think about it in the past where I'd have to kneel down on asphalt, and sometimes the
Hmm.
asphalt's hot and you have rocks and you're just trying to really get in there good. And at one point in time, I thought, well, I could probably get some wood, some cardboard, put something down. But now that I'm even, older and smarter, I think about padding. I kind of think about the long term as opposed to I just have to hurry up and get something done.
Yep,
out there.
I agree. I was just building my deck and in my backyard, and I started, what tools do I need? So I'm part of the as part of the planning process. I'm like, oh, I need my ergo mat to be able to sit on or kneel on as I'm going through this. Do I have all the tools that I need? Do I have all the materials close by so I don't have to keep getting up and moving around, right? So that way I can stay and focus and drill the screws into the boards and things like that. So I think planning is a really crucial piece to this. But if you kind of take a step back, and we can actually go through the prevention through design process, right, where we can engineer those things out, or we can make like in our world, we deal a lot with flow loops, whether it's liquid or gas. We're running that through a particular system. Well, if it's down on the ground, then you're going to have to get down on the ground to get down and bolt that together. But if you can put it at a certain height where it makes it a little easier, you can put it in that power zone so where people can actually use the right tools and use them appropriately, so that it'll be less stress on their bodies, right? Because we deal with a lot, like you said, we have a lot of physical jobs out there. So how can we make it better and easier for them?
Right, right, right. I really like how that you're talking about looking at that power zone out there. So
Hmm.
that's something that we really kind of started to focus on is let's look at keeping things about waist high to about shoulder high and just kind of do everything that we can to make it really easy, handy to get to. All
Hmm.
that good stuff then, I wish that I could say that we get it right every single time, but like all things, it seems like when you go to run some piping, there's already some conduit there, and then you got to go around that. And so it's not always a nice, easy fix every time. It definitely
No.
is- it definitely has helped out a lot, but it's not always a nice, easy fix.
But to that point, I think, these are learning opportunities that you can use within your organization. I think, again, having that participatory component where they're bringing this stuff to your attention, and that way we can look at, well, are there maybe some stubby wrenches that you can get, or, so they can access those particular areas, or maybe there's a right angle drill that would be helpful for them. So being able to analyze that and look at solutions that you may have done on this part or this particular system that may be applicable on another system, right? So that cross-pollination of ideas is very helpful. So if you have a way that you can, meet and talk about those things, or at least get that communication out, I think that's very helpful as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have found that once the guys will start to open up, they really have a lot of really good ideas because
Hmm.
it's them who has to really do that kind of stuff. I
Correct.
c- I can sit down at my cube, I can do some research, I can look around, but it still is not really the same as somebody who has to do it, really
Hmm.
sitting down and fixing these issues. So,
Definitely.
and I think um, it also helps with the buy-in that it's their plan, you know.
Hmm.
I just want it fixed, so I don't care if it's their plan or my plan or anybody's plan, but anytime that you can get that buy-in, of course, that really helps out an awful lot out there.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah. If you can get them to propose a solution, that's your starting point right there. Because when you come in there and you say, "Oh, we just need this," that you shut them down, right? They brought it to your attention, but that may not be the solution that they had in mind, right? And to your point, that doesn't create the buy-in that you need. And they may not even use the solution that you gave them.
Well, right, 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 because well, it doesn't work. And that's just me being a most of the time office guy thinking that I know how to fix things. Really
Hmm.
has to be
Exactly.
them, who goes out and does
Hmm.
this kind of stuff then. And I found that there's different levels of participation out there. Some
Hmm.
folks are a little hesitant, like maybe they've heard and seen this before at other places, and they just want to kind of wait and see. Are they really
Yeah.
going to fix something? Or they talk about it and then come back or do they stick it on a list that just magically never gets done, but it's on that
Hmm.
list? You know?
Well, and to that point, I think the organization really needs to be prepared for when people bring things up to them, right? The management as a whole needs to agree that, we are going to take a look at this and we are going to have feedback communication back to this person that, oh, well, we will put this on the list, and we're going to look at that after we get done with this, particular issue that we're already dealing with. So that way you can continually keep them in the loop because you don't want it to drop off because then, like you said, they feel like I said something and they didn't do anything about it, so I'm not going to speak up again. So you really want to make sure that you keep them in the loop and show them that it is important, and keep on coming up with those solutions.
Right. I have found a couple folks that opened up a little bit more in a one-on-one forum. And
Hmm.
I haven't quite figured out if maybe they didn't want to open up because it was their ego talking, or they thought their buddies were going to chime in and make fun of them, or what it
Hmm.
was. So sometimes you can get more of that buy-in and just that one-on-one. You just happen to magically catch somebody in the hallway and just kind of say, hey, let's kind of go over your issue. Let's kind of walk it and talk it, and so that definitely helps at times.
Yeah, I've found that, unscheduled walkthrough just to see how everybody's doing. Not that you're going to look at anything in particular, but, see how Johnny's son did during his baseball game or something like that. Just to come talk to them, just so that way you're not talking about work or you're not pointing out, oh, well, that's wrong, this is wrong, right? Because they feel like you're the police at that point, right? But if you start talking about, hey, how did your daughter do in ballet the other night at her practice or recital or whatever? You start to engage those folks and then they start to trust you a little bit more. And then you can start, well, I saw you doing this. Why were you doing that? You
Mhm.
know, does that hurt your body? You start asking those types of questions instead of, well, you were standing on that ladder a little awkwardly. You start trying to go down that compliance route, that kind of shuts people down a little bit quicker. But if you can kind of ask, why are you doing that? And why are you doing it this particular way? That might help lead to a better solution than just point it out and say, oh, I'm going to get you another ladder or whatnot. Because it
Right,
may not
right.
be the ladder's fault.
Right. I have seen people do these little, almost like a little pain wince. And of course,
Hmm.
that's something that they're actually trying to hide, of course, too, because there's
Yeah.
people around. But you can go back and say, hey, I kind of saw that wince. I want to sit down and talk about this. It's what can we do to make things better for you, out there.
And I think
Mhm.
that's key too, is knowing your folks, in terms of, if they're holding their wrist or they're limping or, they're wringing their wrist or whatnot, or just kind of, rubbing their neck after they've been doing something for a long time. I think those are some key signals that their body is telling them this is a pain point that we need to address, and especially if they're doing it repetitively, more frequently or often than you were expecting them to do, right? Maybe that project's not going as well as originally thought, and they were having to redo it. So they've got to take all 16 bolts off again, right? So it does make a difference. And so anytime you can make it easier, your employees are going to be more thankful for it.
Oh yeah. I do see what looks like a lot of people struggle when they do that overhead work,
Hmm.
running that conduit, and they got the ladder up as high as they can, and they're running that conduit up and kind of getting it laid in, and that looks like that's really hard work on your shoulders.
Hmm.
You know.
Very much so. So, I would look at, is the ladder the best tool for that? Can you go to a man lift or possibly even a boom lift of some sort to maybe move that material and install it properly? Or maybe is it a two-person job, right? Sometimes the solution is not necessarily the most expensive. Maybe it is, something that you could, um, maybe you can strap it up first or winch it up. So,
Exactly.
so with the stuff that you already have, it doesn't necessarily have to be brand new, but does it solve the problem? And when you are solving those problems, don't just look at it from a safety perspective. Can you increase quality, productivity, as well as efficiency? Because that's going to be able to, you're going to be able to sell that better to management than just, oh, well, this is going to help us be more safe,
Right.
right? Because again, management and leadership is not, they don't necessarily speak the language of safety, but they speak the language of finance and productivity and efficiency. So if you can put it in those terms, I think you're much more likely to be able to implement that solution.
Right, right, right. I've used that strategy pretty well, but I've had a hard
Hmm.
time having actual numbers. It's
Hmm.
almost like everybody can feel a big difference. You can see a difference, but I could not put a number on it, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think that goes back to what are your lagging indicators telling you? What are your injury rates? We had a back injury. It cost us $100,000. So if you can kind of bring in that information from your workers' compensation, you can also use OSHA's Safety Pays website and kind of put those calculations in there. So that way you can actually start to look at, well, what's your direct cost and indirect cost?
Mhm.
Right? So bring in your risk management folks, bring in your medical and your workers' compensation folks, and even your insurance company sometimes can help you with those to
Mhm.
determine what those numbers are. So you can kind of so that way you can kind of compare and contrast. We've had two back injuries, $200,000 versus a $10,000 improvement effort. So you can kind of help offset that and make sure they can see that difference.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, I need to get on that website again. I did use
Hmm.
safety
Safety
pays
pays.
at another job because
Hmm.
they had a lot of accidents and injuries, and then it was really super easy to go back and calculate that, you know.
Hmm.
But when you're really running a lot of zeros and one for the year, it's really hard to go back and do that
Oh
stuff.
yeah,
But
for
I need to
sure.
go back because maybe they've revamped a few things and made it better. I probably
Hmm.
haven't looked at that thing in 20 years. So,
Yeah, yeah.
mhm.
It's a good website. Hopefully, it's still there.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. But you bring up a really good point also that I try to stress to other safety folks is that the bosses always care about finance, about money,
Hmm.
and how do I increase production and yield, and how do I get that one more piece out every single day. And not that they
Hmm.
don't care about safety, but if we can talk in their language in their speak, that's really
Hmm.
really going to help us out um, as safety professionals.
I think if you can also, inform them that, hey, if this person does go out on medical leave, then you're going to have to train somebody else to come in and replace them. Do you have anybody right now? Or are you going to have to start that whole process, right? You're going to have to hire somebody. You're going to have to go through an orientation. You're going to have to train them to that same level of skill that that person that had to leave and take over for that role. So, or is that manager going to have to fill in for that, say on an automotive line, right? That
Mhm,
supervisor would have to fill back in until they can replace that person.
mhm.
So I think if you can kind of look at it and make them see that, because sometimes they don't put two and two together that, oh, safety is safety. You go off and you worry about that. This is my world over here.
Yep.
But it's all interrelated, and they need to understand that looking at it from a systems perspective is not about the materials, tools, training, and all that. It's also about having the person there to do the job, right? So
Mhm.
HR and safety work hand in hand to make sure that that operations person has the staff that they need.
Right, 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 right. I was able successfully a couple of times to actually get the profit margin, and then you can really sit down and say, hey, this accident now cost us the following. We now had to
Hmm.
make X more of these same things to even to
Correct.
even break to even break even to even get back to say now we're ready to go again. You know.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
sometimes companies don't like to talk about that. So you have to present everything, and somebody else somewhere has that magic number, and then
Oh,
they can look
very,
at
very
it, of
much
course,
so.
and then kind of give it back to you. That's
Hmm.
that's a very closely guarded secret at a lot of companies out there.
It can be,
Um,
yes. But that's where you have to foster those relationships among the other leaders within the company in terms of finance, accounting, shipping and receiving, for crying out loud. Sometimes that plays a big factor in, let's just say, receiving chemicals,
right.
right? To help with your HAZCOM program. So it's good not to, safety is applicable to everybody in the organization. So the more connections and networking you can do, the better off
Oh,
you'll be.
oh, yes, yes, yes. Oh, yes, yes, exactly, exactly. Um, so have you seen, actually, I started to go down a route and I forgot my thought, Matt. I'm sorry. So,
It happens. It's a Friday afternoon. I get it.
that's right, exactly. Exactly, exactly. So I have seen where folks have come up with some very good um, fixes out there, and that's because they had the freedom and flexibility to get things done, and they didn't have
Hmm.
to go back and say, "Hey, I want to ask for this, I want to have this," you know. So if folks have that, just have that freedom to get things done, um, they don't have to sit around and wait, and that helps them out because they'll always have that little bit of anxiety, like I have to go ask for money now. I have to prove my
Hmm.
point. I have to. But if they can just go out and buy it, that really helps out an awful lot.
It's very true.
Mhm.
One of the things that we did at a previous company that I worked for is that we had like just a quick little form to say, here's the problem, here's the solution that I'd like to implement, and this is how much it would cost or whatnot, and then be able to have management review that real quick, and then be able to give a quick turnaround on if is that possible. You can also make that into kind of a competition to
Oh,
help with an incentive program, right? To
huh?
say, hey, we want to hear what's going on out in the field, right? But again, management has to be prepared for an overwhelming amount of people that may want to be involved in that, right? Or they
Uh-huh.
have multiple ideas. So management has to be willing and able to act when they do receive those. They can't just sit on a shelf or in a suggestion box because, again, these people want to hear and be heard, right?
Right, right, right,
Need that feedback.
right, exactly. So, yeah, that is a very interesting perspective when folks say, "Hey, we want to hear from the workforce." And then
Hmm.
sometimes they hear things that they don't want to hear. And it's like, oh no, now I have to really
Yeah.
do something about it. I just kind of thought I was going to hear how everything was nice and rosy and great.
Hmm. Well, and that's where companies again need to do a better job with, putting on that continual improvement hat, right? So if everybody's on the same page and everybody has that same mindset, like we're all here to help improve our workplace, right? We're here to remove hazardous conditions and hazards from the workplace, but we're also here to make sure that we're getting the job done and we're doing it in a timely manner. We're doing it efficiently. We're meeting our production goals. If everybody's on the same page with that, it makes it a whole lot simpler because everybody's under that same umbrella to work, right? And to your point, if they can fix it, all the more better.
Right. I think that ultimately what I would like to do is to get to a point that the workforce is empowered enough that
Hmm.
I go around and I see something and I'll say, "Oh, look at that. There's something that's different." And somebody will just say, "Oh yeah, I just fixed it. I just did it," so that they
Hmm.
don't have to almost wait for like my magic approval or for somebody else to say, "Well, we'll stick it in the budget and could take some time to."
Hmm.
So I think we're getting better as a workforce, of course, in doing this kind of stuff. So I'd really
Yeah.
like to get to that point that everybody solves their own issues for the most part.
Hmm.
Um,
I think that's a great mentality to have. I do kind of caution you on that because I have had issues with them, you know, having that empowerment and the ability to go and change things and make those
mhm.
improvements. But when it comes to, let's say, building a staircase,
Oh,
as we know, if they needed a work platform, there are certain requirements that those need to have that not everybody is aware of. So I think that it is good to have some sort of cursory look and say, hey, here's some of the requirements that you're going to need to incorporate that because I had a team that they were so excited to show me the improvement, and I was like, well, that I'm so proud of you guys, but like the stairs did not conform to the rise over run, right?
Mhm.
They didn't have the right slope. So, we had to go back and say, hey, we need to change this and this and this. So it kind of had a little bit of a damper effect on it, but once they got it done, it was amazing.
Mhm.
But if we can kind of, again, go through that prevention through design process and make sure that everybody knows what the requirements are, and if there's any specifications, then I think then that's how that program can really, really thrive.
Right, 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 right. Wow. I bet you those guys were so proud and happy. And then, of course, after you talk to them, not that they weren't proud and happy they did it. They're just like, oh, we really should have asked somebody. We should have found the specs. We should have,
Yeah.
found something that was already made, and just buy that at
hmm
least and stick it there too. You know.
But in a lot of cases, especially in the research and development world, there is nothing there to go off
Uh,
of. But we do use certain tools and stairs and ladders and things like that. So to do the things that we are kind of on the edge of science and research, right? So that's where we have to kind of take a step back and say, well, what are we using and how can we use it safely, right? Or how can we design it better? Because we're usually within Southwest Research Institute, we are creating a new test or designing or engineering a new test. So let's say that they have to go up on a platform or something like that. Well, let's build railing around it, right? So that we don't even have to think about fall protection, right? So let's design those things in. Same with our improvements. Do we have any design guidelines within our organization that, somebody learned something from another experiment that we can apply here? Or maybe if we're designing, let's say, a pressure vessel, ANSI has standards on that we can use. So making sure that people know where to find that information and I think is a key component as well.
right, 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 right. Well, Matt, this has been a fantastic talk. We are bumping up on time. Could you let the audience know where they can catch you if they have any other questions, comments, want to or just kind of pick your brain about things?
Yeah. So I'm definitely on LinkedIn. You can find my profile. Probably looks a little different now. I just shaved my head. Uh, but get my summer look, I guess. And then I'll also be at Safety 2025 in Orlando, which will be September 22nd through the 25th.
Mhm. Awesome, Matt. Thank you so much. Um, and once again, episode 267 with Matt Herron of the Southwest Research Institute. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you so much, David. Appreciate
And
it.
everybody have a great day. Oops.